Hello and welcome to the Cubs on Deck podcast. I am one of your hosts. My name is Greg Huss, and today I am joined by a new man behind the mic. I'm joined by Brendan Miller. Brendan, how's it going, man?
I am so happy to be here, Greg. You've been on my podcast for 3 years now.
Yeah,
So it's a little weird how the roles have reversed, but I'm really excited to be doing this with you.
wild, dude. This is wild.
I know.
I
It's
hadn't really
weird.
thought about it that way. Where like
Oh,
I've been on your dating back to Cubs related and
yeah.
CHGO. I've been on your show multiple times.
Yeah.
But
Corey and I joke, you're like the best friend of the show.
yeah, I've been on. Have I been on your show more than any other guest? I might
I
have.
think you have. And every time we do it, I'm like, you know what, Corey? I think you need to let this go 2 hours, 3 hours, because we just go up on these rants.
It's
I
great.
love it.
Well, actually, I mean, so I've got you on the show. It's kind of a unique circumstance, right? I mean, because you're the Major League Baseball guy, right? Compared to Corey, I think you're more prospecty than him.
Yeah.
But you're the Major League guy. So I guess what's a little bit of background on you? I guess we'll lead off with that for people that are just listening to Cubs on Deck, only here for prospect stuff. Talk about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, I mean, so I've been doing the Major League Cubs podcast with Corey Friedman for about 8 years now. It's been crazy to even say that. So we started Cubs related 20 late 2015 actually, and then we moved on to CHGO. Great opportunity. We get to work with a lot of the beat writers, get inside information from the coaches and players. With Ryan Herrera and a lot of the cool guys there. Our Del Metrics, Cody Del Mendo, Vibe King, and Luke Stuckmeyer, and Jared Willis, and Corey. So at CHGO, it's been really fun to scale a lot of our fandom up. My side, I have a background in, I'm a scientist by trade.
Literally.
I was going to say I played shortstop growing up through high school, so I'm kind of a shortstop.
Dude,
But
I went out and sorry to cut you off. I went out and was
Yeah.
playing catch with a buddy the other day on Saturday. I went out and played catch.
yeah,
And I came back and I tweeted out, I was like, watch out, Dansby, I'm coming for your job. I woke up Sunday morning feeling
Your arm?
rough, dude. The arm was
I know, man.
falling off. It was rough.
I know,
So maybe I'm not coming for Dansby. I don't know.
Oh my God. If I threw even 10 throws right now, my rotator cuff would be torn. But I did grow up playing shortstop. I have my A2000 in my closet. But my specific background is, I guess, in data science. I do a lot of biology research, but I have a lot of data science background. So I implement that into a lot of my fandom. At the end of the day, I'm a fan that is I guess I do have a unique skill set. So I can kind of one of my goals is to make, numbers can be kind of boring and people get bad reps for being a numbers guy. My thing is that I like to have fun with it. And I like to try to answer questions that whatever come into my mind or thrown my way. So that's kind of my goal with all this.
I think you're underselling it. You do some great work. And what you're getting at there is one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on here today. For this episode, we got four segments going. They played there at the beginning of the YouTube segment for those of you guys watching on YouTube. But at the beginning of this episode, we're gonna do a segment called "What Happened," where we're gonna dig into some of the prospects that made it up to Chicago and then have been struggling. Because that's been a topic of discussion quite a bit in some of those pitchers, especially.
Yeah.
And then we'll get into your bread and butter here. We'll get into the Triple-A Statcast dive. And that's one of the perks of this year is that we have Statcast data for the AAA level, which is
it's
awesome.
so cool. Yeah.
Yeah. And then towards the end, so for the nerds out there, the first half of this episode is where you're going to thrive. And then the back half of the episode
I'm not going to thrive.
For the back half, we're going to talk a little bit about it's a segment called "Here's What I Want," where Brendan, you're going to give me a guy a role or something like that on the Chicago Cubs that you want to see filled. I'll give a player that is currently in the system that can kind of fill that role eventually. And then the final segment, I copped from the baseball barbecue guys, Jake and Jordan, Jake Mintz and Jordan Schusterman over there.
Nice.
They said, "What's his deal?" is that segment. So you're going to give a guy, and I'm going to just kind of give you the rundown of what he's about. So
cool.
It's kind of a unique episode here that we've got with some Major League Baseball knowledge whipped into some prospect coverage.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. And you got to give yourself more credit too. You're a big league guy. You know what's going on. You're a diverse fan, Greg.
It's true. It's true. I've got the Cubs fan, but I was saying, what was I saying that on? I think I was on some show. Oh, I was on the away game show with
Yeah.
Caffrey, and he was asking. He goes, "Is it a whole lot easier to be a Cubs major league fan, knowing that you can fall back on prospects?" And I was like,
Ooh.
"Absolutely." Like when the Cubs team sucks, then I can just like fall back on like, oh well, I got prospects to follow.
I feel like it's so like I give you and Greg and the rest and Brian and the rest of the guys so much credit though, because the amount of effort that goes into following multiple levels of the organization, I would pass out. I would get fired from my job having to follow all these guys to the level that you guys follow them. It's
Don't tell my
unbelievable.
bosses at my day job. So
Yeah. All right. Maybe this shouldn't go on YouTube then.
yeah, this will get taken down. No. No, but all right, man. Let's dig in right away.
Cool.
The first segment is what happened, right? So we've got several guys that are some still considered prospects, some have graduated from prospect status, but guys that we've seen really kill it at the minor league level, and then come up to Chicago and really kind of start to struggle quite a bit. We've seen Hayden Wesneski kind of turn it around a little bit over the past since he got called back up. But between Jeremiah Estrada and Caleb Killian and Brandon Hughes, they all kind of have different situations and different
Yeah.
scenarios as to why they're struggling at the major league level now. Is there one guy you want to dig into first?
Yeah, the one that I think is on everyone's mind. I mean, there's a lot of guys that have struggled this year. Unfortunately, it's not to like say they're all doomed and everything, but I do think a lot of the hype going into the year was on Hayden Wesneski. At least that's what we were getting from listeners, and I was really excited about him first and foremost because his stuff from just a pure movement and velocity perspective. Cubs have not had a starting pitcher that has Wisniewski's overall profile in quite some time. And what I mean by that is that stuff, that slider in particular, has about 18 inches of horizontal break, and your average slider's around like 6 to 8 inches. So he's almost 3 times more than your average slider. And then you couple that with velocity, and you saw the strikeouts last year, and you saw the 33 innings of stellar run prevention. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, we finally have a young pitcher. I'm going to start, being remembered of Mark Pryor over here. Like I'm getting hyped up, right? Ultimately, with Wisniewski, one of the disadvantages of his game is that the fastball has been perhaps problematic in projecting his success in the future. This is always on his mind, and he even admitted as such that he needs. This is an interesting quote by him. He says that he needs his fastball to at least be average. Like, when do you ever hear a major league starter admit my fastball is below average? And he does it in like a serious, authentic way. He knows
to get to average, not only like admitting that it's below average right now, but like he knows he doesn't need to get it up to be a plus pitch necessarily.
Exactly, because he knows like his slider plays well, and there were many starts last year where he was throwing his slider kind of as his dominant pitch type with that cutter, where he was throwing those two pitches more than his fastballs. Hasn't really happened this year. The big thing with Hayden is that because the fastball doesn't play up, right? Because it doesn't rate, if you want to look at like Stuff Plus or the pitching bot grader, we can go over like how the stuff he's even made. And we always get questions about that. But basically, those two predictive models grade his fastball as below average. And the reason is because it has a little bit more run than your typical high volume fastball. And it may not have the velocity to correlate with a lot of the run prevention that you see. So his margin for error is slim. That means when his command is not on point, then he's prone to giving up loud contact. That's what's happened this year. His command has taken a step back, and it's not just his fastball. His slider or sweeper command has taken a step back. And whereas those two pitches were rated in the 95th percentile of command last season, right now they're about league average, which is not bad. His walk rate is actually not bad. A lot of the pitches are just being leaked over the middle of the plate for Hayden. And because the fastball is not above average, command average, below average stuff on the fastball is going to get hit hard. And that's what's happening. I think he'll need to improve on that fastball, or if it doesn't improve, at least dial in on that command, because he's shown the ability to do it in the past.
Yeah, I think that goes back like tying this back to like current prospects and the way that
Yeah.
we watch pitchers as they kind of climb up the ladder, I think it becomes super, super important that you're watching what that fastball profile is. And I think we
Yeah.
talked about it. I think on the I don't know if it was last week. Whenever I was on with Brian Smith last, we were talking about Cade Horton's fastball and how important it is for him to have a good profile overall, not to be dominant with a 14 fastball, but just to make sure that it is at least average, maybe a little bit above average. And the two ways you can do that are velocity or pitch or movement and design of that pitch. Or in Hayden Wesneski's case, I guess third way is by locating those pitches in the right places on the edges of the zone. And if you
Yeah.
don't have that plus fastball, then it becomes worrisome about how you can ultimately use that off of your plus pitches like a slider. Now, Cade Horton, I think that you watch the fastball with Cade Horton, and it's better than Wesneski for sure. But it's just something to keep an eye on as he continues to climb the ladder.
Yeah, and I think that's a good lesson, even for myself. Like even when you, a lot of the new ways to evaluate pitchers, at least from like a fan's perspective, is being driven by these run prevention models like Stuff Plus and Pitching Bot and everything. And it is like a nice, gentle reminder that a good fastball is good for a reason. Like having a dominant fastball can get guys to the next level if they can develop a secondary pitch. For Hayden, it's like the complete opposite right now, which is not a bad thing, right? But it does kind of, to your point about Cade Horton, I think put those guys on a different potential level because their margin for error is during the developmental stage a little bit larger because they can perhaps develop more secondary pitches.
And I think you flip the script here and you look at a guy like Jeremiah Estrada, and it's kind of the opposite, right? Where he's got a fastball that's really damn good, and the slider hasn't been as good this year. I guess keeping with the theme of this segment, what happened?
Yeah.
Because we meaning prospect people handed you, meaning major league guys, we handed you a product in Jeremiah Estrada that was ready to roll, right? Like he was dominating the minor leagues. He was climbing up the ladder fast. The fastball was an 80 grade pitch. The slider was a 70 grade pitch.
Yeah.
What happened with Estrada?
The fastball lost about a mile per hour in velocity. He's still throwing 95, 96, can reach up to 97. But when he debuted last year, he was throwing 97, 98, 99. The slider was looking really good. Those two pitch types, the fastball in particular, was literally grading as an 80 out of 80. That means like two other pitchers in the league had a fastball like Estrada's. When I saw that, my mind exploded. I'm like, oh my God, the Cubs have one of these guys. And then you couple that with the slider graded as a 65 on the 80 scale, or a standard and a half deviation above all other sliders thrown from just a movement profile, from his fastball velocity. And all of a sudden, the Cubs had this young guy with 2+ pitches that was getting whiffs. That hasn't happened this year. The velocity has gone down. The slider is driving Estrada's regression, if you want to call it that. I don't know what happened. The feel for that pitch is not there. The command, if you just look at his pitch zone profile all over the map, clearly he just does not have a feel for that pitch. I don't know what happened with that, but that's what we're seeing. That's why he's not succeeding right now.
Yeah, and he's even gone down to Triple-A, and I think he's had 2 different outings where he's allowed runs down in Iowa since he was sitting back down.
That's exactly what I want to hear, man. Thank you.
All right, man. Let's real quick hit on Brandon Hughes.
Yeah.
Because I think he's a completely different situation than all these guys. I think part of it might be injury driven to a certain degree with Hughes.
Yeah, it's hard to like parse out, is it stuff related, command related, or is it being driven by injuries? And he's on the mound with a knee brace, right?
Yeah.
So like, I mean, you can't help but think a lot of this is being confounded by injuries. He's always been a weird guy in that his stuff, from just a movement profile and everything, doesn't necessarily project for run prevention.
Yeah.
But it's the unorthodox mechanics that he has. You saw the release point, you saw the deceptive delivery, and that's still there, right? So for him, it's not as if like his command is all over the place and all of a sudden he can't throw a baseball. I think a lot of that is perhaps just being driven by this bulky knee brace on his knee and then a weird timeline to get back up to major league ready.
It's so interesting with the difference between major league players and minor league players when it comes to that, right? Where like he's pitching at the major league level with a knee brace, like he's trying to fight through it to get wins for the major league club. If something like that happened to a minor league player, like he'd be on the shelf for longer than he probably needs to be because it's all about development, right? As opposed to all about winning. And so that difference is super interesting to me, I guess. Especially for a guy that like came up and he was a pitcher for a very short amount of time.
Yeah, when guys like that start struggling, it's so like you can point to reasons why other guys struggle. You can point to Estrada as we're talking about, like, oh yeah, his slider is not there, so of course he's struggling. You can point to even Caleb Killian. All of a sudden, he's walking 10 guys a game. You can point to those reasons. You look at Hughes, and it's like something doesn't quite make sense there. And it also reminds me of like the Hendricks stuff that we saw last season. Before the injury, he was getting whiffs. His changeup before the injury was perhaps like arguably the best in his career from a whiff rate perspective. But it was the injury. It was a shoulder thing that caught his command, and the margin for error was so slim with Kyle. And I think that's kind of similar to how we interpret the Brandon Hughes stuff.
We just need to get Brandon, front of the show, Brandon Hughes healthy, because that's going to be huge for him. Yes. You mentioned Caleb Killian.
Yeah. And he's a weird one, man. He's a weird one.
It's like, I'm curious to see what you have to say about him, because I think that he might be the guy that we've gotten the most questions about. People replying to my tweets, people commenting on Facebook, whatever it might be. The Facebook replies are quite an interesting place to watch Caleb Killian opinions. I'm curious about, because I'll admit that I'm releasing my new prospect list next week.
And he's not in there, huh?
And he'll be in there because I'm going 40 deep. So
okay. Yeah, never mind. You're a psycho like that.
I'm going 40 names deep. So
only 40. That's it.
Yeah, really. I could go like Brian and go I think he went like 100 one year.
I don't know
just
how you
kind of an a la carte menu.
Crazy.
Yeah, so Killian will be in there, but he'll be down quite a bit. Spoiler alert, from where he'd been in past years. So. What are you seeing with Caleb Killian? The nice thing is you have some Statcast data that you can dig into with him in Triple-A, right?
I do. So thankfully, Statcast data is available for Triple-A now. I haven't watched him in Iowa, so I there's a degree of discomfort trying to figure out exactly what's going on. I've seen his start when he was up with the Cubs. It was a disaster. I have seen one of his Iowa starts, and I know the history with him. When he was traded from the Giants, he was one guy that you see his Fangraphs page, like, oh my God, he's not walking anyone. Yeah. He's walking like a batter and a half per game. Like, and this is screaming potential like Kyle Hendricks 2.0, right? Mm-hmm. Someone who doesn't have the stuff, but has this pinpoint command and the ability to at least attack the zone. So when he started just losing his command, that was on the back of my mind. I thought that was never going to happen. Then he started learning what they're trying to do with them. And there's always this push-pull balance. And you hear a lot of fans making fun of the pitch lab and everything. And like, I guess I understand it, it's kind of a stupid name, but like people do make fun of it.
What's your proposal for a new name?
Oh man, I have to think about that.
I've never thought of it, so I figured
the Pitch Institute. How about that? That might be worse.
I like that. That might be worse. That might get more made fun of even more. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll have to think about that offline. But like with a lot of the pitching infrastructure, they clearly saw something they thought they could change. He goes over to the Arizona Fall League. You start seeing velocity 97, 98. You start seeing a knuckle curveball. Caleb Killian is talking to us at CHGO about his changeup being a comfort pitch going into this year. And the way he was getting batters out throughout his time in San Fran and even in the short going in Chicago was using heavy cutters. And that cutter graded above average. That was the only pitch he threw that graded above average from a stuff perspective by like pitching bot and Stuff Plus. It was just that cutter. So clearly the Cubs thought, you know what, this is not going to work in the long term. We need a more out pitch. We need a wipeout pitch. Let's mess with the knuckle curve. Let's try to get him in a position to rely on the changeup more. I don't entirely know the consequences of that intention, but you can't ignore that when that happened, the command did significantly change to the complete opposite direction. So I do wonder what were the consequences of that, or if it's, I guess unknown for the Cubs pitching infrastructure why that's even happening. And then this year, I started looking at his data. I'm like, stuff looks interesting. Stuff looks a little bit different. So his slider this year actually has 12 inches of horizontal break, where the average is around 8 inches for a typical slider. Now you have different classifications. You have like the sweeper being classified now. This is in like the sweeperish range of horizontal break. I don't know if they're actually like calling that a sweeper or whatever, but that is a unique pitch type that you didn't really see much last year. And then you look at that curveball, that knuckle curveball. Interestingly, that knuckle curveball last year was being thrown with about 12 inches of horizontal break. This year, it's actually only 7 inches of horizontal break. So it's more of like a north to south shape. So clearly they're messing around with this.
I was going to say, I feel like that's something where I know the Cubs, for all prospects, but especially when they're younger, when they're at the lower levels, there's a very clear effort to distinguish those two pitches, right? To make it a true slider and a true like downer curveball.
Yeah.
So they don't blend into one offering. I think that Ben Brown is kind of the exception when it comes to that rule, where they just say let it fly with Ben Brown. But with everybody else like trying to really differentiate the two. And so I think that's what we're seeing from Caleb Killian. My take on it is that like I've said this dating back a while now, he just doesn't generate enough swings and misses.
And that was always my concern for him,
Yeah.
even debuting. Like there was a really dark moment in last May of the 2022 season, and like the Cubs just lost 10 in a row. And like Corey and I were doing one of those episodes. I'm in a bad mood. I'm in a terrible mood when we're doing that. And I remember very vividly, I'm like, yeah, man, like even Caleb Killian, like I don't see him getting the whiffs. I need the whiffs. I need the whiffs.
Yeah.
And that was always on my mind. He was someone who just did not get enough whiffs.
I mean, last year, I'd have to go look at the numbers exactly, but last year he was either last or second to last in swing strike percentage in the entire system. Yeah. This year he's looking at a very similar number. And so I'm worried about where he goes next. I think a move to the bullpen might be the next move to see if some of the stuff plays up a little bit more. But I'm a little worried about him.
The walk per nine, though, I mean, I'm worried about him too. I think the whiffs or lack thereof is like the main reason we're worried about him. The cutter usage is also down this year. Like I think it's around 10% or so. So they're significantly messing with this entire pitch mix. But I guess if there's an encouraging sign, it is the walks. Like the walks have been better.
And he needs to, like, right? He needs to not walk guys. He needs to kind of rely on getting outs in the field because he's not getting those swings and misses. You can't do both, right? You can't fail to get swings and misses and also walk a bunch of guys. That's just like that combination won't play.
Yeah. It's. I guess we should have tampered expectations because the whips were never there, but
is the story of my life, man.
I know. I mean, that's one thing. Since you guys do so much prospect work, like I'm sure you get a ton of crap. Like, oh, you're hyping these guys up too much.
Oh yeah. Oh, you have no idea, dude. All right, man. We've spent the first 20 minutes of the show in a downer mood, right? We've talked about four different guys that are struggling. Let's transition to segment number 2, a deep dive into some StatCast data. I know we've already been doing that to a certain degree, but I wanted to kind of turn the tables over to you. Is there anybody that you've kind of looked at in terms of their StatCast data on Baseball Savant that really jumps out to you in a positive light?
Yeah, I mean, I look at like, man, we can look at this from the pitching side, or we can look at this from the hitting side. I think just like, before we get more in the pitching side, I do want to bring up James Triantos, I'm an infield guy, right?
Yeah.
So when you see like James Triantos and that strikeout rate and the heavy contact, like I think that's pretty encouraging. From the pitching side, it's hard to.
You want to hit on Triantos real quick, actually?
Please do.
All right. So Triantos, obviously we don't have the StatCast data for Triantos. We're not seeing how hard exactly he's hitting the ball, his exit velo numbers and stuff like that. But what's the most encouraging to me is the eye test with James Triantos, right? Because we knew coming into this year, we knew that he does not strike out. Like, we know he limits the strikeouts an incredible amount. He's actually walking a little bit more than I expected him to this year. But I tweeted out, I think earlier this week, how exciting it is that we went into as we entered spring training, we had incredibly high expectations for James Triantos. I think that, like, based on actually my bash metric from last year, he was one of the best hitters in the system with
Yeah.
age and level and ballpark all taken into account. And so we came into this year with like really high, like top 10 prospect in the system expectations for Triantos. And then he got injured, right? And then he went down with
Yeah.
the knee injury. And so we got a late start to the season. I feel like that just put like that just put a kibosh on any like hype that was surrounding James Triantos. And then he came back late, and he's been nothing but terrific since he's returned.
Dude, like when I look at those walk numbers and strikeout numbers and his age and
Mhm.
playing a high A, like, dude, like he has a 12% walk rate and a
Yeah.
7% K rate. He's 20 years old,
And
man.
the sample size is getting larger by the
It's
day.
a big sample. It's
Yeah.
almost 120 plate appearances. And
Yeah.
like, he is slugging a little bit. It's not as if this is all like, blue piss. Like he has 2 home runs, some extra base hits.
And that's the thing for me is he's putting together the extra base hits, but he looks stronger at the plate. So when he
Yeah.
was at Myrtle Beach, I know that it's the Myrtle Beach air. I know that it's hard to hit in that ballpark, but he just to get to the ball to like barely go over the fence, he would swing so hard. Like, go back and watch some videos of his home runs last year. Like,
Okay.
he had to get into the ball to get it
Okay.
out. And granted, like it's the ballpark does limit that. So take that into account. But
Okay.
it just looked different. Coming to this year, and he's driving the ball to the opposite field. He's driving the ball to right
That's a
center.
good
He's
sign.
driving the ball to right field, and he's driving to the warning track in right field, and looks way smoother doing it. It's not like he's swinging out of his shoes to do that. It's a very smooth approach, very smooth swing, and it's just kind of bouncing off the bat pretty well. So like that, like the scouting, like I put my scouting hat on real quick. I'm loving what I'm seeing from that side of things from Triantos, in addition to all the numbers that have been terrific.
Yeah, man. Whenever I see like a ratio like that, when you see like single digit strikeouts and then double digit walks and then the age, I'm curious, do you know what he's at for your bash metric right now?
He's one of the top in the system right now.
Okay.
I can pull that up while we're
Yeah,
talking.
because I can't, and you guys follow this way more than I do, but I don't remember a hitter having such extreme strikeout to walk numbers in this Cubs system, like in my lifetime.
Well, and I'll point to another guy that's doing really well right now. That's Moises Ballesteros, who
Oh my
actually,
God, he's like the hit tool is unreal, man.
yeah. So actually, with Ballesteros, actually we've gone this far without mentioning it. Ballesteros was just called up to South Bend. Today we're recording this on
Oh
Monday
wow,
night. He was called up to South Bend. I don't think it's actually official, but he was posting on his Instagram story that he was getting onto a plane to go up to South Bend. So
cool, man.
by the time you guys listen to this tomorrow, it will probably be official. Moises Ballesteros as a 19-year-old catcher, as a 19-year-old catcher that's walking way more than he's striking out,
It's
he will be
nuts.
up in South Bend. James Triantos has a 136 bash this year. Now that I have the numbers pulled up, which would
Pretty
be
good.
in the system, that is behind only Christopher Morel when he was down in Triple-A, and Moises Ballesteros. It's Ballesteros and James Triantos are 1 and 2.
There you go. I mean, Ballesteros, man. Like I guess I'm concerned about the defensive position in the future.
That's so
Everyone.
good, dude. Though, like
I
that
know.
is
Yeah,
that is so good.
I see the sigh over there. I see the sigh. But like, yeah, it's a fair question, right? It's
No,
like,
it is, and I think that's even where I go to is like, can he stay at catcher? And I've always been the route of like, I don't think he can ultimately stay at catcher, although he's looked pretty damn good at catcher for Myrtle Beach. I just don't think he stays there. I think you continue to promote him up the ladder
I mean, can he play
based on the
first
bat.
base?
Yeah, you can play first base, and you just continue to promote him based on the bat. Like, you're not waiting for the defense to come around.
Yeah.
Just let him. And I've mentioned this on multiple episodes with Ballesteros. He's really not even like tapping into that pull side power yet. So
And when he does, look out.
yeah, he is tremendous at using the opposite field, going to that left center gap. He's not meeting the ball like what we see from Matt Mervis is the best in the system in terms of meeting the ball out front, being able to pull the ball and like striking it at the exact right moment.
Mm,
Ballesteros does not even remotely have that mastered yet. So
mm.
once he starts to work on that, obviously when he tries to lean towards that a little bit more, the hit tool goes down a little bit, the strikeouts pile up a little bit more. But like when you're going from a 12% strikeout rate up to a even 20% strikeout rate, I'll take that.
Whenever you see a sub 15% strikeout rate and then power off the charts like that with the walks, it has to pique everyone's attention. Those are unicorn hitters in the league, especially for that age. Think about, his age is absurd and he's doing this. You can't help but be excited about that. All right. So for the pitching side, man, like a lot of hype about the different starters right now, of course, with Horton, of course, with Ben Brown. I turn my attention to what the Cubs need at the major league level,
Yep.
and that is back end bullpen help. So, of course, Alzolay kind of secure some of those higher leverage roles. The bullpen in general has looked better in the past 2 weeks, but you have Cody Hoyer just inching his way back. You have your guy. You put him on my radar, Daniel Palencia, who's just chucking heat, triple-digit heat. But I think for me, with not to put so much hype on different changes, because it is always a work in progress, but I think with Hoyer, he has such unique pitch types. And even before he was injured with Tommy John, I always thought his how the Cubs went about developing him was so weird, because he was using this like weird fastball, like one finger grip thing.
Mm-hmm.
But since coming back from Tommy John, he's throwing, upper 90s, 98, 99. And then Brian Smith tweeted this out late last night. And then as a result, I got 4 hours of sleep. So Brian Smith completely ruined my Monday. So he tweeted this out like, "Oh, this is interesting. We have Cody Hoyer throwing."
He has no idea what he's doing to you.
No idea what he's doing to me. So I got up, I started making figures, I started reading into it, I started like trying to find comparisons, and like I only tweeted at Brian like one time, but honest to God, I pressed delete like on 1,000 different tweets. So when I was looking at Hoyer's stuff, the one pitch that caught Brian's attention was this 92 to 93 mile per hour cutter slider thing, if you want to call it that. And his fastball, Cody Hoyer's fastball, has natural run to it. I think it averages around 15 inches of run side break. Not surprising given his mechanics and his release point. The disadvantage of having a fastball like that is kind of similar to Hayden Wisniewski's issue. Whereas there might be times where he struggles against left-handed batters. Even Alzolay had that issue. So I think what's going on, if I had to guess, I'm not sure, but if I had to guess what's going on, they are trying to find a pitch type that can attenuate left-handed batters, similar to how Alzolay developed a cutter and a tighter breaking pitch, whereas Alzolay's slider basically looks like Julian Merriweather's slider now. It just has a very north to south shape. I see what they're doing with Hoyer. Maybe they can do the same thing with Wisniewski now that I think about it. That would be interesting. So with Hoyer, they're basically, so this slider thing has about 4 inches of I guess run to it as well. But because he has unique mechanics, it's not going to necessarily like run per se. It's a 92, 93 mile per hour pitch that's going to just go down a little bit. And you can see that being a little bit tighter, a little less leaky to left-handed batters, and that can play off his changeup, his fading changeup that we see Leiter use for a lot of success against left-handed batters. And I think that's the intention. Let's give Hoyer an ability to get lefties out. That way, when righties come up, it's up and in to the wrist, to the kneecaps with 99 mile per hour fastballs, as well with those sliders, that 85 to 88 mile per hour slider that can go the other way.
So with this new pitch, I'm going to try to dumb it down here a little bit because I see what Corey has to deal with sometimes. So with the new pitch, right, with it moving in that way, is it something where it's diving like a bullet slider as opposed to something that's like sweeping across the zone?
Yeah. So I mean, like I wish I had a baseball with me, but it's just gonna his release point's like kind of offset, right?
Yeah.
So his fastball goes like that, right? So
it goes into a right-handed batter.
it goes right into a right-handed batter. It's
Yep.
very similar to Hayden Wisniewski's.
But
so,
it also goes right into the barrel of a left-handed batter.
Exactly. So, and that was Alzolai's problem. Like when Alzolai, before he got injured and missed most of last season, remember he was having tons of success against right-handed batters, but he gave up 13 home runs of his 14 to left-handed batters because he was throwing heavy sinkers, heavy sliders. That's Cody Hoyer's profile.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, we were talking to Alzolai, he developed basically another new pitch, another new sharper slider. So for Hoyer's, it's not going to be a slider per se. And it grades weird because it does have like run in terms of how it's released. But what's going to happen with that pitch at 1993, to your point, it's going to be a little bit like bullety, and it's just going to go down. Just going to go down. And that's going to be a little bit sharper against left-handed batters.
So we got to come up with a new name for that pitch too.
I'm sure some guys will figure it out.
So someone will figure it out. All right, let's get into a couple hitters here. Do you want to talk about Brennan Davis first, or do you want to? I think you wanted to talk about Jonathan Perlaza too, right?
Yeah, let's start with Brennan Davis. That's okay. I guess I want to throw it to you. Like, what's going on with him? Because for me, very weird.
Yeah. So I wrote that article at Northside Bound about a month ago now about digging into what some of his Statcast numbers look like. I was channeling my inner Brendan Miller and trying to figure it out a little bit. Right now, Brennan Davis is on the IL. We're still waiting to hear back what the deal is with that IL stint. We watched him kind of come out of the box slow, grimace as he got to first base, and then he exited the game and went on the IL. So still wait and see on what that's all about. That's kind of like first and foremost with Brennan Davis. We got to get him healthy. Like, he has to be healthy. He has to be fully healthy to succeed. With Brennan, what he is doing is just complete opposite of where he was trending before he got bit with the injury bug, right? Where he was before, he was chasing sliders out of the zone in incredible amounts. Like he was chasing early and often in counts, and then he was getting jammed on fastballs. It was going in the wrong direction in terms of that part of his, like, how he approaches hitting. This year, he's not chasing nearly as often as what we've seen in the past. The strikeout rate is way down, and it feels like this is more from a feel perspective, less of a numbers perspective, where he's ultra focused on not striking out, right? Where he's like, he wants to put the ball in play, and the way in which that's like to the detriment is because he's not hitting the ball hard now. Like his average exit velo is like way down. I'm digging into some of the Statcast stuff, but his average exit velo is way down, and he's just not showing that power that he once had. I talked about it was probably less on this show. It's been a while, but it was probably on Growing Cubs with Jimmy. We would talk hours on end about the way the ball came off of Brennan Davis's bat. And it was before we had exit velo numbers on him. He would hit the ball hard to the opposite field. And we're just not really seeing that part of his game anymore. It's hyper focused on not striking out. It's a different approach. I talked with some people in the Cubs system, and it was all about, for him, it's merging those two parts of his game, merging the ability to make strong, solid contact and that ability to not strike out. Once you put that together, you have a complete player, and you can produce good results. But if you're doing just one of those things, you get bad results all the way around. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's concerning first and foremost, as you said, because of the injury and the recent back injury, and rarely do you see young guys go through injuries like that. So that's always my main concern.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I wish I knew more of like the intent and what they're trying to do with them. Because sometimes hitters start to decline, and you can point to a sudden inability to hit the ball hard. And you can look at average exit velo, or you can look at max exit velo. And the max exit velo, you could think of what is his capacity. And with Brennan, the capacity is 110 miles per hour. That was his hardest hit ball this year. So clearly the capacity is there, right? So that's an encouraging sign for me. And then I look at, okay, well, now his contact rate is actually not lining up with his strikeout rate in a bad way, where his contact rate is about 76%. That would qualify as league average in Major League Baseball. That's a little concerning given that, the velocity separation from the major leagues to Triple-A. And then to go with that, the strikeouts, they're sub 20% right now for Brennan. That kind of speaks to, I think, the Triple-A level where maybe some of those guys can't put Brennan away.
Yeah.
And so I'm a little worried that if he were to, let's say, come up with this type of intent, that the strikeouts are going to go way up. And I think even the whiffs may go way up. And then, the power is not going to be there. That's a recipe for disaster. That's my biggest concern. I don't know. It's a weird adjustment phase.
It's that tweener type of hitter, right? Where he doesn't have enough power to justify a high whiff rate. And he doesn't.
But we know the power is in there, right? Like we saw the power in years past, unless the back injury is going to ruin his life.
And so the hope there is that the average exit velos are down because, like you said, he still got the 110 max exit velo.
He still has the capacity to do it.
The hope is that the average exit velos are down because he's just trying to put the ball in play, not because that's just like how he will always hit. You know what I mean? And that just gets really tricky. It's a really weird circumstance. First and foremost, you just got to get healthy and like truly healthy to see what like he can fully do. But at some point he just has to produce, I've been holding on for as long as humanly possible in terms of like my hope for him and my rankings of him. I think that when I came out with my off season, now this was not like right before the preseason. It was like, I think we did it in November, and I still included him as number 1 on my prospect ranking, knowing who PCA was, but it was more of a hopeful ranking, right? It was I know what he can be, and he was just not healthy last year. Now the bright side is he's still super young, like he's still very, very young at the Triple-A level, but we just can't lose that. We can't lose that development timeline because he's just missing so much time,
Yeah, the comparison with the injuries and the back and everything, there's not that many, so it's hard to draw precedents to figure out what's going on. I think from like thinking about this from the major league side, it's weird to say, and it sounds kind of like mean or whatever, but like at this point, I think Brennan's production is going to be a luxury for this team. Like for the Cubs and Jed Hoyer in the front office, they can't afford to go into 2024 without certainty. And for the Cubs to have Brennan Davis be a certainty for them seems so slim right now.
Yeah. And I think that's another reason why you build up prospect depth, why you have, because you run into problems with Alexander Canario getting injured. You run into problems with Brennan Davis getting injured and then missing time and missing development. You got to build up this depth. And that's something that the system has done over the past several years, is they built up that depth, but they've also built up that quality depth, right? So when I was making my prospect list, when I'm creating it, I've leaned heavy into tiers this year, where tier 1, spoiler alert, is PCA by himself. But then it's the tier 3 level, the non-top 100 guys. That's where you really start to get like the quality depth, not just guys that like you're hoping they could possibly be a bench guy at the big leagues, like that kind of depth. It's like actual like depth where you're hopeful that they will be starters at the big league level. There's a big difference between those two types of depth.
So I want to throw a question to you. It's more of like a general question. And Corey and I kind of talk about it every now and then, but it's a question that always comes up. It's a hot topic on Twitter and everything. But the discussion of volume versus impact for the Cubs farm system.
Yeah.
From my point of view, there's been a lot of disappointments in the farm for the presumably high impact guys like Brennan Davis. Canario's injury was unfortunate. Caleb Killian's regression and reversion has been unfortunate. And the separation from the lower level talent to the upper level immediate talent for the Cubs' current timeline at the big league level seems to be a little bit misaligned, at least from like a 2024 impact. Of course, you have PCA coming up, and like if he keeps doing this, I know maybe September, right? I honestly don't know, but like we know Jed's talked about the power profile, and the Cubs need to blow out teams with power, and PCA is great. Defense is great. Also, power for someone with a type of athleticism is above the tier average. Mm-hmm. But the question that we get is like, is that going to be like enough, right? And I think that's one of the areas of concern, especially when you look at like Alcantara's developmental timeline.
Mm-hmm.
My hope for all these guys, like I'm a stupid fan first and foremost. So I always want to be super greedy. I don't want any hiccups. Like I
Yeah.
don't Theo said, oh, development's, non-linear. Damn right. I want it to be exponential. I don't
Yeah.
want any hiccups, right? Because so I look at like Alcantara, some of these
Yeah.
other guys, and I get a little on edge about the Cubs' ability to supplement for the 2024 team.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of fans feel the same way, but it doesn't discount that the volume does appear quite high. And that does give me excitement. It's just matching that up with immediate impact.
So when I've gone on other shows, I've kind of answered this question. But I'm gonna answer it in a little bit of the way you posed it. I'm going off the cuff here a little bit. So bear with me. I've always talked about how the Cubs have done a really good job of building the system so that they can have two or three bench slash starter type guys come up, like somewhat impact guys come up for the next however many years, 4 or 5
Yeah.
years. And that's been what's been really good about the way they've built this system. The problem is the way that the system was built. The first couple years, the guys that debut are not star type play, like not star potential players. They're the Hayden Wesneskis and the Caleb Killians, the Christopher Morel, even where I think that he's a kind of a different case to a certain degree, but for weird reasons.
Yeah, he's a
But
weird guy.
yeah, but guys that are coming up that aren't like superstar top 50 guys, not even really top 100 guys, right? Like Caleb Killian
Yeah.
wasn't a top 100 guy. Hayden Wesneski was on maybe a couple top 100 lists. I think Prospects Live had him top 100, but I think that was it. Or Just Baseball, somebody had him top 100. But so the problem is that the first wave of call ups of this extreme depth are not superstar or even star players. At the major league level right now, you have a boatload of not star players, right? You have guys that offensively are good. You have Nico Horner is a good offensive player. Dansby
Yeah.
Swanson is a good offensive player. Seiya, Ian Happ, go
Yeah.
down, Cody Bellinger, like they're all like good offensive players. But you don't really want on a playoff team, you don't really want Ian Happ and Seiya Suzuki batting 3 and 4.
Right.
And
It's a
so
weird place to be.
so what the ideal situation would have been is if the upper levels of these waves of talent would have been super, like the Kevin Alcantara's, the Owen Casey, that
Yeah.
could be potential middle of the battle orders. I know we've had a hiccup here with Kevin Alcantara, but like those guys profile as potential middle of the battle order guys,
Yeah.
or middle of the order bat guys. And so that it hasn't worked out. Had the Cubs gone out and signed a couple, or signed or traded for a couple of guys that you can pencil in the middle of the order and maybe have a little bit less depth on your major league roster, then this might drive a little bit better. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It hasn't worked out that way. And so your timeline for 2023 and 2024 is a little off.
It feels a little off. And it's maybe the farm in that discussion is a little unfair to the players because across the league, look at the Dodgers, for example, right? Like Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman,
Mhm.
outside the organization
Exactly.
acquisitions,
Exactly.
they're middle of the order guys. They were acquired because of savvy trades by the front office. And they have a history of making those types of trades. With the Dodgers, they also have a history of developing pitchers quite well. And they have a history, to your point, Greg, of developing guys that are depth pieces in
Mhm.
back of the lineup guys. Max Muncy, Chris Taylor, Kike Hernandez back then,
And
right?
and that's what the Cubs are developing right now, right?
Yeah.
Chris Morel is, in an ideal world, your Chris Taylor, right?
Yeah.
The Max Muncy, like it's just that's who you're bringing up right now, are those guys.
Yeah.
You're not bringing up the Freddie Freemans and Mookie Betts.
Yeah. That's a
So
good way of thinking about it.
I love Dansby Swanson. Dansby Swanson is one of my favorite players.
What
I
are you
love
saying,
Dansby.
Greg?
What I'm saying is that he can't be you can't
He
rely
can't.
on Dansby to be your middle of the order bat.
Yeah, and that, we
And
always have those discussions too. It's like he's not he's your all-star shortstop defender,
yes.
but you need more power. You need a
Yes,
big bat in the lineup.
exactly. So I guess transition that into this next segment, we can kind of turn through this is what do you want at the major league level, and I'll give you a player. It sounds like
I
the
want a
first one
lot.
we'll hit on is like that middle of the order type bat, the power potential, and I'm going to point to Alexander Canario, right,
Okay.
where he is now coming back from injury. Rich Biesterfeld saw him down in the ACL, down in the complex league, rehabbing. I still to this day hate ACL as the term.
I know
I'll
it
get over it
scares me.
eventually. Yeah.
No, we won't.
So yeah. So Canario's down there rehabbing. He will make it back up to Triple-A Iowa sometime soon. I think he is that guy that's like the real I'm trying to figure the word to describe it, like real high
High
potential,
ceiling.
high ceiling type guy as far
Yeah.
as power goes, right? I think he is that answer for middle of the order type bat in the short term. Even I think that probably not. We shouldn't expect him this year, but I think next year, I think the 2024 timeline works out well.
Yeah, what I liked about Canario too, and it's always hard to interpret some of like the strikeout rates and everything in the context of like changes and plate approach changes. I remember Jimmy, I was listening to you guys, back then, and
Mm-hmm.
I think it was I always pronounce his name wrong. Kevin Mayday, right?
So I always thought it was Kevin Made. I need to get this confirmed. I always thought it was Kevin Made, but then I was talking to a Cubs coach that called him Kevin Made.
Mayday.
So it's either
Listen,
Made or Made. I'm not
okay,
sure. I'm sorry, Kevin, if you're
but I
listening.
remember I think it was Jimmy who mentioned he didn't like didn't he swing like every pitch or something like that? He had
Yeah,
some weird extreme
it was
change.
it was in 2021. Kevin Made, I think he got to like a 3-ball count, like not
Yeah.
walked. He got to a 3-ball count like 6 times the entire season or something like that. It was something absurd. Like he wrote an article over North Side Bound about it. I'll go try to dig that up again sometime.
Yeah, it's like, and you get these weird extreme like experiments, if you will. And I think that stuff is great because I think it kind of like breaks mindsets and it kind of um it embeds certain changes for the long run. But with Canario, I was impressed when he was in Triple-A last year, and you started seeing his strikeouts go a little bit down. I
Mm-hmm.
think in Double-A in Tennessee, at a strikeout rate of 26%, power is off the charts. And I was a little worried that once he faces, fringe big leaguers in AAA at times, that he may start whiffing a little bit more. And the
Yeah.
strikeouts basically remain the same. And like a
Mm-hmm.
25% strikeout rate with that power profile is totally acceptable. Right. So I started to get a little bit more hyped about Canario as a result.
Yeah, I think I've always been a low guy on Canario in terms of all the prospect writers out there. I think that you look at like he brings a lot of, we talked about it I think last week. He brings a lot of like Christopher Morel qualities in that he is lighting up the Statcast like the little percentile sliders, right?
Yeah.
He's hitting the ball really really hard. He throws the ball really really hard. He runs really hard. He's just explosive. He's explosive in every way. So that's still like we still got to wait to see how he returns if that explosiveness is still there once he gets assigned to a full season affiliate, because that's going to be huge for his development. If he
Do
is not that explosive coming back, it changes entirely.
I mean, maybe you don't know. Is there a timeline expectation for him when he's going to be back?
No, I think that we probably see him for a few more weeks. I'd say down in the complex league. I don't think that I can't imagine they're going to rush him
Okay.
up to Triple-A coming off those 2 injuries that he had. So
Crazy, man.
I'd assume, just speculating here, that he still spends a few more weeks down in Arizona before he
Okay.
gets assigned. And with him, we might even see him kind of do the rehab in the lower levels of the minors in South Bend or in Myrtle Beach or something like that. So
Okay.
that's probably not out of the question entirely.
Yeah, man. That's another one of those players that, oh man, it's just like you saw what could have been with the injury and
Yeah.
the freak way it happened. But I'm curious, man, if he comes back and he showcases the same athleticism, there's a lot of high ceiling potential there.
Is there another type of player or another player specifically that you're looking for the Cubs to develop and bring up to the big leagues that I can provide to you?
Yeah, I'm looking a little bit lower. And I think Pedro Ramirez, I haven't seen so much of him. He's like a lower tier guy, right? I think he's like 18 or 19 years old or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah, he's still 19.
Yeah, but like I saw a little bit of video of him, and I love watching those like backfield videos of these guys. And he just
Yeah.
looks like he's a guy. I don't know. He looks like he's a
Yeah.
guy. The stats look good too.
So the rundown on Pedro is that he came up right about the same time as Ballesteros last year up to Myrtle Beach, tail end of the season. just to kind of get a cup of coffee, get a feel for what full season ball was like, and he did really well. He was kind of a folk hero in deep
Oh yeah.
cut type prospect circles, right? Where he's a really small guy. He was playing shortstop. I think that I think he was playing shortstop alongside him and Christian Hernandez were playing shortstop down in the Arizona League, Arizona
Yeah.
Complex League. And so people just kind of he's a smaller dude. Like he's not really like small and skinny. He's kind of stocky.
Yeah.
He's got some weight on him. But people love that he just raked, right? He just hit the crap out of the ball. The batting average was super, super high. He didn't strike out a whole lot. He also didn't walk a whole lot, but he was just like everybody loved him. It was super excited to see him like actually play on MILB TV. And then he got called up to Myrtle Beach at the end of last year, and he performed pretty damn well. Like he was pretty good during his time in Myrtle Beach last year. And so I think that we were really high on him in terms of the bat coming into this year. But I was also like super skeptical because he's a second baseman only. Like he's no longer a shortstop. He's only
Okay.
going to play second. And really, he's not a strong defensive second baseman either. So like it's the bat he's going to have to rely on.
Okay.
And he doesn't really have the power to like bring the entire
Well, you're
offensive
bringing
profile
down the
there.
mood a little bit, Greg.
But so he came in this year and he really struggled to make contact. The strikeout rate was way higher than it had been in previous years. The batting average was way lower than it had been in previous years. That felt like not sustainable. That felt like it was not going to continue.
Okay.
So we sent back down to the Arizona. I don't even think it was the complex league at that point. It was just sent down to
Whatever.
Arizona.
Yeah.
The development list, all that good stuff. To work on some things. When he came back up, since he's been returned back up to Myrtle Beach, he's been really, really strong. He's looked a lot better in that amount of time. So with Pedro, it's going to be entirely dependent on just like carrying that hit tool. And the hit tool is good. He makes really good, like he does a really good job of like, he has that feel to hit, right? Where the barrel, he can just put the ball or put the bat on the ball with the best of them. And you just got to keep following that as he kind of climbs up through the system.
Yeah, I have a few more. I mean, I know we're approaching hour mark or whatever. I got nothing to do, by the way. So, like, if you want to go longer,
We're
then
driving, yeah.
I'm totally fine.
If people are done listening, they can stop listening. If they want to hear
Yeah, I don't
talk
care.
about players,
I got more questions. We don't get to do this often, so I'm going to fire them away.
What you got?
I got a question about your experience. This aligns well with when you started making like Cubs prospect content.
Yeah.
Christopher Morel, right?
Okay.
You got to witness him go from, mid-tier prospect status to literally, whether it's in jest, I don't think he's even in jest anymore, being compared to like Sammy Sosa.
When you do Sammy Sosa things, you get Sammy Sosa comps. Yeah.
So the two questions I have, first is related to his bat.
Yeah.
Like, was the power ever this? What's the word I'm looking for? Like, was it ever imagined that he could have this type of power? I never remember seeing that when he was going through the system.
That's so. You phrase that question well, where it's like, was it ever imagined? He always put up these exit velo numbers. Like he always hit the crap out of the ball in terms of just like when he made contact, it was a lightning bolt off his bat. That was pre like having any semblance of exit velo numbers in the minor leagues. Not even like getting it from other people. We knew he hit the ball really, really hard. He just didn't hit the ball in the air enough for it to matter. He didn't make contact enough, and he never walked, right? So, like, I remember watching him as he came up through the system, and he was a very, like, polarizing prospect to rank because I know, like, Todd Johnson was, like, super, super high on him. I think Todd was probably the highest of anybody on him, and I understand entirely understand why. It was because he's doing, like, he did what he's doing now where he just hits the ball hard, not over the fence back then, but he hits the ball hard. He runs hard. He makes, like, incredible plays in the field where it's super, super exciting. And then he has this incredible arm too. I got it. Like the tools were absolutely there. From my perspective, why I was like lower on him ranking is because like it felt like everything had to go perfect for that to make an impact in Chicago, right? Where like he needed to hit the ball in the air significantly more to like turn that like line drive and ground ball pop into like extra bases. He needed to draw some sort of a walk. I think he walked like twice the entire season in short season ball when Eugene was a thing. It felt like a guy with that profile just could not really exist.
Yeah.
Because you see the three true outcomes with power, with striking out a lot and walking a lot. He was that, but he didn't show over the fence power yet, and he wasn't walking at all. So it was like two, like one and a half of the true outcomes.
Yeah.
And so like, could I imagine the power happening? Like, I think I could imagine it back then, but I had to like really like squint to see it, you know?
So a lot of it was driven by just the whiffs. That's why
It was the whiffs, and then like
the plate approach too.
the plate approach just was not there. Like
And
he was up there just like swinging,
yeah,
and it was awesome. It was fun. Like as like watching baseball, it was so fun. You're like, oh my god, what is like? I always tweet out like the Christopher Morel experience. I always say that when
yeah,
he does something crazy, and it's like
yeah.
he's been doing stuff like that where it's like making you like go wow since he was down in Eugene. It's just so much fun to watch. It felt like it was a super risky guy to rank. You
I
know?
remember watching. It was probably Todd who tweeted out these videos. It was around the same time like Javi, I think, was in this was
Yep.
at the Cubs.
Yep.
And I remember like Todd was tweeting out these videos, and it's just Morel lining like line drives down to third
Yeah.
baseline.
Third bit. Yep.
I'm like, who the hell is this guy?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
remember looking him up on Fangraphs, and I want to say, honest to God, it may have been when he was in Eugene.
Yeah.
Like,
It probably was. Well, I
okay,
know that I think Mike Ernst was the first guy to call him like Javi like or Javi
maybe it
light,
was
you
Michael.
know,
Yeah,
and because it's what it is, right? Like still to this day, like it's
it's
not the
that
same
fast
exact like
twitchiness.
yeah, it's the quick twitch. That's exactly what
Yeah,
it is.
man. And
Yeah.
that's kind of what like caught my attention. So he was like, because of you guys, he was always like in my mind. So when he was called up last season from Double-A, I'm like, whoa, this
Yeah.
is weird. Like I remember so much. I don't want to call it controversy, but I remember following his development from you guys and what you guys
Mhm.
were talking about. And to be quite honest with you, I was expecting when he was called up last year a super aggressive esque
Yeah.
Javi version. And I remember watching him and like he had a chase rate through his first, I think 75 to 100 plate appearances of around 20%.
Yeah.
I'm like, what the hell is going on? This is
Yeah.
not what I heard Christopher
Well,
Morel would do.
dude, you should. So I think I went on CHGO. I think it was like soon after his like it was during his like hot stretch when he first got called up to the bigs.
Yeah.
And I went on with you guys on CHGO, and I think Luke asked me. He was like how did like he didn't phrase it, he phrased it way better than this, but he was like why didn't you see this coming? I was like this version of Christopher Morel is not even
Right.
remotely what we saw of him in the minor
Exactly.
leagues.
And
So
that's why I'm like always curious. You guys got to follow him in detail, and I was, I'm spoiled and got to see him at the big league level and form my opinions that way. But it's so dialing on that point, I always bring this up with Corey because he rapidly adjusts in
yeah,
completely unpredictable ways. I can't predict this guy. I've
yeah,
never seen a guy adjust like this in my entire life. So it's foolish for me to be like, you know what? He's not a guy. Or it's foolish for me to say he's not an all-star. It's also foolish for me to say like, like third base or a defensive position. Like
that's what
I
I was gonna
don't,
say. Yeah,
yeah, it's
yeah,
like, dude, like I can't predict this guy. All of a sudden, he's making 70% contact and hitting Sammy Sosa-esque home runs, where 3 years ago he looked like a completely different player. This guy evolves like no player I've seen, and that even includes Javi, dude.
yeah.
Like he's adjusting
So
crazily.
I get that there's this opening at third base. I get that by trade Christopher Morel is a third baseman, but
Yeah,
I
what's
think
going
that
on there?
if the front office that's not for this show.
Makes no sense.
Yeah, but I think if the front office goes into the right into next year, just banking on Christopher Morel being your starting third baseman every day, you're not doing it right. Like
Yeah,
you why I keep hitting home the point of like he's that utility guy and you thrive off him being a really strong Chris Taylor like utility guy is not necessarily because like that's where the defensive value comes from, which I actually think it is, but like that's not my point. It's the fact that like because if he is that, then you have a starting third baseman that is like actually good. Plus, you get whatever you get from Christopher Morel. You have a starting center fielder that's really good. You have PCA, you have Cody Bellinger if you bring him back, but then you also get to have Christopher Morel and that whole
Yeah.
Christopher Morel experience, So
Yeah.
yeah,
I'm curious. I don't want to take too much of your time over here, but I'm curious about like the Chris Taylor comparison. Because I
yeah,
brought that up as well, like the type of
yeah,
role that he could be.
yeah.
Um, and I look at how the Cubs have been formed for the future. Nico's locked up,
Mm-hmm.
thank God. Ian
Mm-hmm.
Happ's locked
Yep.
up. Saya's locked up for the next 3 years. You have PCA
Dansby.
coming through the system. I do wonder if it's possible to give him a Chris Taylor role because you
Yeah.
do have staples in the corners, and you may have a staple in the center field with PCA, unless they want to use that as the flexible option.
You could have an entire lineup filled out and then also have Christopher Morel and get him the amount of plate appearances necessary to essentially be a full starting caliber player in terms
Yeah,
of plate appearances. That can happen. But
yeah.
I don't know. You got some more prospect questions? I'll answer. I don't want to get too far away from prospecty stuff.
DJ Hurst,
DJ, yeah.
what's going on?
DJ Hurst is doing everything in his power to not be moved to the bullpen. He's looked really strong over the past few weeks
Okay.
as a starting pitcher in Tennessee. It's kind of exactly what we wanted to see from him coming into this year. It's like that strong, like in the zone enough to let the rest of all of his nastiness play, right? Like just don't walk 5 guys per game and you're gonna be all right. You know what I mean? He's looked really strong recently. I think that like it's probably a bullpen profile, a bullpen
Yeah.
guy with DJ. But right now, like I don't think I think he might end the season in a bullpen role. And we've seen a lot of guys be converted to the bullpen. We've seen Luke Little, Ryan Jensen, Daniel Palencia, Riley Thompson for a couple of weeks and then back to the rotation. We've seen that with different guys. I wouldn't be surprised if DJ Hurst is maybe not the next guy, maybe the next guy, but definitely by the end of the year.
Valencia, when is he coming up?
Um, I, I don't think soon. And he'll probably be up tomorrow now that I say that. But no, I don't. I
That's
think
usually what happens.
I think he still needs to get the feel for like what it's like to pitch out of the bullpen.
Okay.
The stuff is very like the stuff is there, like the
Yeah.
triple digits fastball, the curveball, the slide. Like he's still looking really good as far as stuff goes. And I think that like the swagger that he has on the mound rivals Adbert Alzolay at this point, where it's like he looks like a lockdown closer. He looks like a reliever that like has a lot of that energy. But I think he needs to get the feel for coming in that role a little bit more. And I think that we could see him towards the end of the year. I think
I'll
August or
take that.
September. I think we see him this year, but I just don't think it's in June or July.
Ben Brown, walk rate. Should I be concerned?
Um,
5.5 walk per nine.
yeah, I think what scares me the most about Ben Brown and his walk rate is not even his fault. Okay, so I'm gonna say this, and listeners don't take this the wrong way
It's
because
not his fault. That makes me very happy if that's the case.
they're two completely different situations. But I watched Caleb Killian be this
That's not what
extreme.
I expected.
So that's what I'm saying. Hear me out for the whole thing. I'm scared off by that. I'm scared off by the Killian thing. Where like when Killian came to the system, he was this extreme strike thrower, never walked anybody, and then just
Yeah.
like we talked about earlier, just started walking everybody. Ben Brown, when he came over, like he had the best by far strikeout to walk ratio in the system last year, and part of that, and he was striking out a lot of guys, but part of that was because he was walking nobody last year. Like the walk rate was really, really good last year, and it was still good when he was in Double-A this year. And then he got called up to Triple-A, and then the numbers are going a little bit higher. I'm not worried about it yet.
Why is he walking, guys? Have you been able to at least like guess?
It's too many uncompetitive pitches. I think
Okay.
it's not a matter of like not
On
putting
breaking
hitters away.
pitches or fastballs? Do you know?
I think it's fastballs more than breaking pitches, but I'd have
Okay.
to go back and look a little bit closer. I think at this point, I'm more worried about the fastball landing in the zone than the because he's getting chases on the curveball and slider. So like when he's out of the zone, like it's intentionally out of the zone and getting swings and misses.
Yeah.
Versus like when Caleb Killian's out of the zone, he's out of the zone and not getting swings and misses, and so then he's walking guys that way. So yeah, he's not Ben Brown's not going to come up tomorrow.
Damn.
It's a new level. He needs to work on a few things. And I think that we see him once they start to kind of bring the innings down, like slow down the innings that he's throwing, I think we see him up in Chicago then as a kind of multi-inning, even single inning reliever.
All right. My last question, kind of general. I get it a lot, especially at the big league level. People make fun of us for it. We alluded to it earlier. The discrepancy as it stands right now with the Cubs' ability to, I guess, implement some of the tech, some of the recent, pitching, whatever you want to call it, with their
Pitch.
yeah, the pitch lab, the pitch institute, but like their ability to bring out the best in veterans, more so at the bullpen, the starting, this is a complex question, but more so bringing over these relievers and giving them a second life. The Cubs have done arguably one of the best jobs in
Yeah.
Major League Baseball, driven by that infrastructure. You saw some of that inkling towards the big league level last year with Estrada, with Keegan Thompson. And then unfortunately, you're seeing that go the opposite direction in almost a fashion that appears worrisome, that it's breaking a little bit. So from your perspective, and you got to see this with Killian, you're seeing this with Keegan Thompson now and Estrada, and then we talk about Ben Brown and you throw out, the Killian worst case scenario. What is your feel for balancing experimentation in terms of their overall development, right? Because it seems aggressive, and I like aggressiveness, but is it potentially too risky? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I don't know if this will be a direct answer to your question, but I want to point out that something that they've been really good at with those like veteran guys and like reimagining what they throw
Yeah.
is that like those pitchers have already been big leaguers for several years, right?
Yes.
They're already really good pitchers. They
Yes.
just have had a downturn. They're good. They've made it to the big leagues and spent multiple years there for a reason, right? And so then if you can incorporate one pitch or a different way in which you pitch, then you're taking a good player and making them great in whatever that bullpen capacity. Like a bullpen guy is only so so good, you know what I mean? But you're taking a good player and making them great. With prospects, I think it gets tricky, right? Where with I'll point back to actually Keegan Thompson is a good example. I think that Caleb Killian and Keegan Thompson fall into a similar category for this, where like they made it up to the upper levels of the minors. Keegan Thompson was successful in the big leagues, but it's not like they had really good stuff. We already talked about Caleb Killian did not have good stuff. Keegan Thompson, when he was coming up through the system, did not have good stuff. Like
Yeah.
it is, I talked about this with Kevin on away games. Like the development of Keegan Thompson is one of the strangest things I've ever experienced in my entire life. Because
Really?
like when he was coming up through the system, he was that like pitchability guy. Like he had 6 different pitches, and
Yeah.
his where he thrived was like sitting on the edges of the zone and like mixing in enough cutters and sliders and curveballs with the fastball that like nobody knew what was coming. Then he made it up to the big leagues, and it's like, all right, now he's like a fastball slider dude. That's like it was just,
Yeah.
and he's pumping high 90s at some points. It
Yeah.
was just a completely different player than what I
Yeah.
grew accustomed to watching as he came up through the system. Alzolay is kind of the same way in that. But I guess
Yeah.
long-winded way of saying this is like, I think you just got to be careful with making sure that prospects, when they're the lower levels, you're adding and subtracting from that repertoire or adding and subtracting from like the way in which they throw enough just to make them successful as they climb the ladder and become better pitchers, right? Like
Yeah.
become know how to pitch. And then once they reach that level of the major leagues, we know that more tinkering is going to happen. Like that
Yeah.
that happens with Tommy Hotovy and the whole crew up there. So you make them good pitchers and then crank them up an extra level. Justin Steele is a really good example of that happening exactly how you want that to happen.
Yeah. And I pointed Justin Steele because in a way it was it's weird to reconcile, but he went through some experiments, and the
Mm-hmm.
experiment was, let's try out the sinker in late 2021. Let's try to promote some of that curveball action, maybe some changeups. And he was looking like a 4-pitch guy going into 2022. And there was a brief moment where I was more optimistic about Keegan, given his hard breaking stuff. And all of a sudden, with Justin, it was like, you know what? Screw everything.
Yeah.
I am going to become a 2-pitch Chris Archer-esque pitcher.
Yep.
And he's taken off ever since. But it's not to say, oh, they should have never experimented with that. It's almost like you kind of have to go through that process to figure out what works best for you. And that's aggressive. And part of me thinks like what we're seeing with Keegan and Estrada and other guys, like it's not going to work for everyone. Like this may not be the protocol for everyone. I think back when I played baseball, and not saying, oh, I'm a baseball player, but like that messed with my mind. I needed routine. I could not, if I changed anything, I was a mess out there, right?
Because you're thinking about those changes. You're thinking about implementing those changes on a daily basis, on a pitch by pitch basis, when you should be thinking about how am I getting this guy out?
Yeah, and I look at like Alzolay. Alzolay, I think, is like the golden child of this Cubs pitching lab because he's a different human being from 2018. Everything, even from like 2 years ago. And he was able to do it. And now he's throwing high leverage innings after like significant injuries as well. It's like, but then you look at his attitude and like you can see why it works.
Adbert knows how to pitch. Like he knows how to pitch, right? Like he is, when he was coming up through the system, he was a four-seam fastball, curveball guy and thrived off of both of those pitches. But he also learned how to pitch as he came up through the system. Like he learned how to get guys out, even if it's with a different repertoire. He learned how to get guys out. That's like very anti-metric of me to say that from a guy that likes looking at the numbers.
But it's like, not like the numbers. Yeah, like the numbers are going to be influenced by that mindset, right?
Yes,
like
and
it's all intertwined.
And then you come up, and now he's a sinker, slider, cutter guy, right? And it's just and he doesn't throw the four-seam curveball, right? It's like it's literally the opposite pitcher, but he's still successful.
Yeah, it's really fascinating to watch, and then like you do hear, oh, all these new numbers, they're actually not that useful and everything, and like it reminds me of where we kind of were in the mid 2000s, late 2000s, and everyone's talking about the dichotomy of like sabermetrics and old school baseball. Like I've learned to appreciate by talking to friends who are within the games, like one of my good friends is a pitching coach in the league. I also have multiple friends who are like actually in analytics in front offices. And like, I went to graduate school with Max Bay, who created Stuff Plus. So yeah, and then I stole a lot of his methods in my own like research, but I hear a lot about the generality. I don't know the specifics, right? But I get an appreciation for how intertwined this all is.
Yeah.
This is how baseball is going to operate. And whether it's in the next 2-3 years, Jed Hoyer's front office or a different front office, and maybe not Tommy Hotovy, although I love Tommy, but these concepts are here to stay. Like whether you like it or not, man, there's millions, dozens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars thrown into this infrastructure across the league. This is here to stay. It's just a matter of how do you communicate that? How do you get the best guys to have an 18-year-old go through the system with cohesiveness to adapt?
Yeah, and now the league is trying to limit the amount of money spent on that, but that's a different story.
I completely disagree with that. The margin for the margin for messing up with that type of experimentation is so high, and you see it with the Cubs as well. Let these teams spend money on that.
Yes, exactly. All right, man. For those of you that are still listening to the show, I've loved it. Yeah, I've loved this. This has been terrific. I don't know if listeners will still be around for this part of the show, but I've loved it. All right, you want to plug anything that you've got going on over at CHGO?
Corey and I do a show every Sunday. We usually do it live. I write for CHGO every now and then. Been doing this for a long time. It's a hobby of mine. Honestly, I just like doing this. Like, I hope that comes across. I've been lucky that Corey and I have been consistent with it. And I think he and I are both recognizing that over the years now. But if you ever want to listen to like big league talk, honestly, Corey and I come on the shows and we have zero preparation, man. Yeah. And everything we talk about is kind of like off the cuff. And this is like when I'm not doing like personal stuff, whatever. All I do is baseball. Like
Yeah.
this is like all I do. So I don't know. I think it comes across. I'm not even saying, oh, I hope it comes across. This is just like what I do. So if you're into Cubs and baseball, like, I don't know. I think we do good stuff. I have fun doing it, and I hope other people appreciate it.
Yeah, everybody needs to go listen to whether it's CHGO with the Luke and Cody and Ryan crew,
Yeah.
or it's you and Corey going.
Yeah, and they've been
every Sunday
fun
night.
too.
Yeah,
They've been fun too.
exactly.
I think before we sign off here, I think like one of like growing up in baseball, there was a time where I wanted to work in front offices, and there was time like I was very like data heavy and everything. And I think
Very
there's
have you just spent the entire episode talking
yeah. But like my point is like I think like there's room for fandom and like having a good time with all this with data as well. Like I think it's like very baseball culture-y at this point to have all this data intertwined. And I think the dichotomy of like, oh, numbers guy, oh, not numbers guy, like I don't think that quite exists anymore. I think from like a content side, like I think what we do as CHGO, I think reflects that.
Yeah.
Like doing beer
Very
chugs
unique.
with doing beer chugs with Cody. Like our Slack channel, like 1 a.m. was off the ropes last night. But I feel like it's a good place for Corey and I to like bring in our Cubs fandom while also kind of still being unique in that we get to talk about a lot of data stuff.
Yeah, you guys have been, you two especially, have been the consistency in terms of Cubs podcasting for a long time. I know I'd be shocked if people are listening to this show and are unfamiliar with you and are unfamiliar with the podcasting that you and Corey do, but can't recommend you guys enough for sure.
Yeah, I mean, like what you guys are doing with like Brian and dating back to your time with Jimmy, and you have Greg Zumak and everything, and even like our good friend Evan Altman, man. It's like this is it's a unique community. I think it's very authentic, and I'm fortunate that we have so many good people doing this because it makes it so much more fun.
You're spot on. You're spot on. All right, you can follow him on Twitter at Brendan_Cubs. What do I have to plug? I will plug actually. So today I came out and dropped. It is a Cubs fan driven prospect rankings because we know that you guys out there listening love to kind of comment on me and Greg Zumak and Todd Johnson's list over at Northside Bound, and we're coming out with our new rankings, like I've hinted at plenty this episode next week. But in the meantime, we posted over at Northside Bound a little tool where you can go on and cumulatively rank prospects. So it'll be a fan-driven list.
Oh, nice.
You can go in and basically you go in and there's two different options. I plugged in a whole bunch of players into the program, and you're given player X versus player Y. You choose which player you would rank higher in the system, and you can just keep playing on that literally as long as you possibly want until you just keep spitting names and combinations out at you. If you're done with it, you just exit out and you're done. Right now, last I checked, we have right around, I think, 40,000 votes so far already, and we just dropped 40,000 votes this morning, which is terrific. So if you guys have not
psychos out there,
if you have not participated yet, please do join the 40,000 other votes that have already come in, because we're having a blast with that. That'll end up getting posted after we post our rankings individually. So
I gotta go do that.
Go check that out over on Northside Bound. You can find our rankings coming up soon. Find me on Twitter at Out of the Vines. I almost forgot my Twitter handle for a second. Find me on Twitter at Out of the Vines. All the other handles for YouTube, Instagram, Cubs on Deck, Northside Bound, all that good stuff on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. I've been posting those graphics over at Instagram. I hope everybody loves them. So, in the meantime, Brendan, thank you again for coming on. This is our longest episode and one of my favorite episodes. No, dude, one of my favorite episodes. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll be back in one short week.